Welcome to the Science of Tree Felling series. In this video, we're going to be talking about the back cut plan. The back cut is going to define the overall width of our hinge. And we talked about in a previous video that we want to achieve a paralleled hinge from the front of the hinge to the back of the hinge at approximately a width of 10% the overall diameter to achieve the flexibility necessary in the wood fibers to control the tree down to the ground. Now we've set up the front of our hinge with our face notch, and now we have some choices to make on the back side of the tree. In the video that talks about liens of trees and how to overcome them, there's going to be some considerations about some front and back liens as we make our back cut. Now, traditional back cuts have usually been made taking the bar and coming in straight back from the back of the tree and moving towards the hinge. If we have a back-leaning tree, the tree is going to want to settle and sit back and sit on top of this bar. In this situation, as we're making that traditional back cut, we have to fill in the kerf or the wood that's removed as we proceed with this cut. So now with a back-leaning tree, as I progress through this cut and try to set up that desired hinge width, I have to stop and pound in this wedge in between actively cutting and releasing this tree. As I continue from the back, I have to keep setting this wedge in to make sure that that kerf that I'm creating does not come back and compress this saw. Once I have gotten up to my backside of my hinge and I can create 10% hinge width of the overall diameter, clean and parallel across, at that time I can remove my chainsaw, and because the tree's back leaning, it will not fall in the direction that I intend it to until I provide mechanical advantage in some fashion, usually with a wedge and an axe. And as I pound this in, again, if you haven't watched the mechanical advantage video, please do. We can overcome tremendous amounts of back lean and drive this tree forward. That's one way to create your back cut plan. If you're in the same situation and your bar is too short, you're going to have to cut from both sides, which means that now you're coming from the back from this side and working the other side of the tree and coming from the back in this side. Again, if you have a back-leaning tree, you're going to need to use a wedge or something to fill that kerf so that it doesn't crush and compress your bar as you're sitting and setting up the appropriate hinge width. All right, now this next way of setting up your back cut is my preferred methodology. I believe it to be the safest way to do it. Getting back to if we just made a back cut into this tree and it had a heavy front lean on it, I would be fearful that the tree would start to move before I've set up 10% of hinge. So if I'm making a clean back cut coming in from the back and this tree has a heavy front lean, I am going to be doing what's called chasing the hinge. So the tree is going to start to move. When the tree starts to move, that's the time I do not want to be by that stump. Why? Because that's when most people become injured or killed, when they're hanging out by the stump once the tree starts to move. You want to be away from the tree as the tree is actively felling. So if we are still here cutting, trying to achieve that 10% hinge width, I'm spending too much time at the stump and now I'm in a dangerous situation. Conversely, if I just start cutting from the back and it's got a heavy front lean to it, and I just stop cutting and leave that tree or attempt to leave that tree before 10% is set up, maybe it's 20, maybe it's 30% that the tree starts moving with, now I have too much wood fiber here. It's not able to bend, and it's going to what's called barber chair, which means it's going to delaminate, it's going to split up the trunk, it's going to hinge somewhere up above you, and the rest of the trunk is going to fall down very quickly and very violently, potentially where you are standing, and injure and kill you, and count your blessings if you're able to ever get away from a situation like that. So what I'm going to advocate for in this video and in all the trainings that I do is what's called the bore cut method. The bore cut method allows me to, whether a tree is back leaning or front leaning, to be able to plunge in and actually remove all the tension and compression wood inside the center of the tree. It'll also allow me to feel and experience whether a tree is hollow or has defect on one side or the center of it, and how much is hollow. That may change my plan. And then once I'm inside the tree, I can set up this hinge knowing that the tree is still safely secured to the stump by the hinge on the front and this release that I've of uncut wood on the back. So it looks something like this, and we talked about in the reactive forces video, again, reference that if you need. The attack corner is in the bottom corner of the front tip of your bar. And with that, I can start to cut and push into the tree. Once the entirety of the tip is into the tree, it's locked in place and it can't kick back out at me. And then it's me just pushing on into the tree as the wood chips are ejected out the bottom side of the bar. If my bar length is too short, I can push in as much as I need to over here, and then I can come around the other side and do the same operation using the attack corner of my bar, coming in and pushing in and driving in to the other side. And I can remove all that wood in the center. Now, once my bar is either cut from both sides or completely through the tree, I can then bring this bar up and set the appropriate hinge width. I know where the hinge starts at the front because I've already created my face, and I can make the hinge stop by measuring, either visually or actually measuring and marking where the back of my hinge should be based on the overall diameter of my tree. Again, do please remember about 10% or less of hinge to allow the flexibility of fibers. Now I've removed all of that material out the center, so there's no tension or compression wood on either side of here. There's going to be compressive wood as I begin to fell the tree on the front side, and tension wood, or wood that wants to pull apart, on the back side of the tree as long as I have front lean. But I don't have to worry about those things until most of my cutting is done. So I've cut out all the stuff in the center, and now I can make or create what's called a release or trigger wood, which is an uncut section of similar size to the hinge wood, about 10%. And you can locate this uncut section either on a back corner or in the back center or the other back corner, really wherever it is your preference to be able to cut it and begin your retreat path and stand on the good side of the tree opposite of the right-left lean that you calculated a few videos ago. So I've bored in, I've come back, I've brought the bar around, and I've removed this section of the tree. So now I'm most of the way cut through this tree. It's still attached to the back, it's still attached to the front. Nothing's moving, it's very controlled, very safe. Front lean, back lean, I don't care, it's not going anywhere. This allows me safe time to set away my chainsaw, grab my axe and wedge, and go ahead and drive this wedge and completely seat it in the tree. Once this is seated in the tree, and now I've calculated how much mechanical advantage that I need, in this particular case, I'll say that I needed one wedge, and I've driven that in till it's filled up the kerf. I know that I'll need to come back and pound it later after I make my release because it's got a back lean. If it doesn't have a back lean, as soon as I make my release, the tree is going to start to move forward because it'll have its center of mass over the center of the stump, and gravity will take it to the ground. If it has a back lean, I'm going to have to add mechanical advantage. But nothing moves until I release or cut this back section of wood, at which time most of my cutting's done. I'm no longer worried about barber chairing, and I can double check and visually make sure that everybody, and audibly make sure that everybody is clear from that area before this tree starts to move. So I can give a command to stand all clear, or let people know that I'm going to cut a tree, and be clear of the area and wait for a response. If I know other people are working in the area, I'm going to wait for a positive response saying, yep, we heard you, go ahead and commence cutting. Or if I'm working alone, I'm going to wait and listen and see if I hear any response from a passerby or a pedestrian saying, hey, I'm in the area, I'm on the other side of this hill, and I don't see you. That's going to cause me pause. But again, we're not in a live moving situation yet. Once I know the coast is clear, I can simply tap this back section of the tree, releasing what is left. And when I do that, I am cutting slightly below where I set my back cut. And the reason for that is if you make it slightly above and your saw bar gets caught in the kerf, now you're actually cutting the portion of the tree that's expected to move, and potentially your tree could get locked up in a moving tree, which is not an ideal situation. And depending on how heavy the tree is leaning forward, I actually use this as a timer. So the bigger the distance I make in my release cut here, if I make this further down in the stump, the more force has to be overcome by the tree by sliding those fibers apart. So if I have a heavy front-leaning tree, I'll set everything up the way that I did here, and I will come even further down on the stump and make my release cut further so that it will actually cause greater time for that tree to start moving forward, allowing me more time to make my retreat path. Once that's cut and once I have the appropriate mechanical advantage and I get the center of gravity of that tree to move up over the center of the tree, it will fall down and it will be dictated in the direction by the hinge that we created in the previous video. Now, one last consideration is where do we make the cut for our back cut? In a conventional cut, or that of about 45 degrees on our face notch, we want to make our back cut slightly elevated from our face cut by about an inch or two. That is what is called a stump shot. It creates a lofted position for the stump to remain. When the tree falls, it'll actually push against the remaining stump and create a situation where the tree will move forward as opposed to getting pushed backwards. Because again, we're going to be somewhere behind this tree and we don't want that tree to come back off the stump at us. So if we make a conventional notch and that tree hinge is going to fail and break at about 45 degrees, we want to make a stump shot. So we're going to elevate our back cut by an inch or two so it has something to push against as it's moving forward. One note of caution with that is how much hinge we actually have when we're making an elevated back cut. And this comes as a function of visually the distance between what's removed and where we're cutting. And it's going to be a little bit hard to describe here. And if you're unfamiliar with this, please do take a class, but it's going to cause an optical illusion where the higher you go on your back cut, the bigger the tendency is to make your hinge even less or maybe even no hinge, because visually you're referencing how much hinge you're having from the face cut that's removed as opposed to the actual location of the hinge, which starts at the apex a few inches below. So the more elevated you get this back cut, the more visual or optical error you're going to have to overcome when creating the hinge, and I'll try to show that here. And then if you're making an open face notch, you can make an elevated back cut if you wish, but again, because that hinge is going to control the tree most of the way down to the ground, it's going to be almost horizontal when the face closes, and when your hinge breaks, you can make this back cut level with the face if you wish, because a stump shot isn't really needed in those situations, which again makes it a lot easier to designate the overall width of the hinge because you don't have that optical illusion. If you are making a Humboldt cut, same rules apply with the elevated back cut. You need to make an elevated back cut by an inch or two so that there's some stump shot or some stump remaining elevated from that face so that the tree has something to push against as it's coming off the stump, and the hinge wood fails once the face closes. And with that, those are some options on how to make a back cut on a stump. Considerations for the plan. Can you make this back cut? How are you going to make the back cut? Is your bar long enough? Can you get in from one side, or do you have to come in from both sides? Are you going to set your release on this side, the center, or this side? Are you going to bore cut, or are you going to come in straight from the back, and all the considerations associated with that? These are all things that you have to think about prior to actually firing up the saw and portions of the plan. If you cannot validate this section of the plan, you do not get to proceed. And with that, if your plan is still valid, let's get involved in the next video. Thank you for watching the Science of Tree Felling series. My hope is that you find these videos educational and that you learn to be a better, safer tree feller. If you know others who may benefit from this series, share the link, like the video, and subscribe to this channel. Keep watching for even more tree felling knowledge. See you next time.